It was a balmy summer morning when I pulled into Magnolia Crest, a planned neighborhood just outside the bustling city of Ravenwood. I'd been searching for a more peaceful place to live, somewhere with tree-lined streets and single-family homes, a setting far from the frenetic downtown energy where I worked as a human rights attorney. My name is Alden Marshall, and until that day, I believed Magnolia Crest would be the idyllic haven I'd longed for. As I drove past the immaculate lawns, I noticed neighbors pausing to wave or nod politely. The green lawns were dotted with well-tended flower beds, and towering magnolia trees provided patches of cool shade. A large sign at the entrance proudly announced, "Welcome to Magnolia Crest, where neighbors become friends." By the time I parked in front of my newly purchased house, the movers had nearly finished unloading. I stepped out, inhaling the sweet fragrance of the blossoms that gave the neighborhood its name. A faint smile crossed my face. Perhaps I'd finally found a place to recharge away from the intensity of legal battles and tense negotiations that often defined my career. I had barely turned the key to my front door when I heard a polite but insistent cough. Turning, I saw a petite woman, around her mid-50s, with meticulously styled hair and a bright pastel blouse. She wore an expression that balanced on the edge between friendliness and disapproval. Under her arm, she clutched a thick binder labeled Magnolia Crest HOA Guidelines. "Welcome," she greeted in a clipped tone. "I'm Roberta Anson, but everyone around here calls me Karen. Long story, truly. I'm the president of our homeowners association." She extended the binder. "You'll want to read every page of this. Our community has very specific expectations." A subtle tension seized the air. "Pleased to meet you, Ms. Anson," I said, taking the binder. "I'm Alden Marshall." She flicked her gaze toward my moving boxes. "Oh, are you by chance a lawyer of some sort?" Her lips pursed. I overheard one of the movers mention something about legal documents and heavy files. I nodded carefully. "Yes, that's right. I practice law, focusing on human rights and public interest cases." Karen flashed a tight smile. "Oh, well, I do hope that won't involve too much traffic in and out at odd hours. Magnolia Crest is known for its serenity." She paused, scanning my expression, then continued, "I trust you'll abide by our guidelines. No unsightly decorations, no unusual yard signage, no feeding strays in the neighborhood. We strive to keep Magnolia Crest beautiful." The admonition about feeding strays struck me as oddly specific. I offered a neutral response. "Of course, I'll be mindful of the rules. Thank you for the welcome." Karen turned to walk away, posture stiff with self-importance. I glanced at the hefty binder in my hands. Little did I know that buried inside those rules, and in the mind of this HOA president, was an agenda that would soon clash violently with my own life's work and sense of justice. Within the next few weeks, I settled into the gentle rhythms of Magnolia Crest. By day, I'd head downtown to my law firm, Henley & Dorset, representing clients in everything from discrimination suits to asylum petitions. By evening, I'd return to the quiet, manicured streets and sip tea on my porch, listening to the frogs chirp under moonlight. Neighbors occasionally stopped by to say hello. An older couple across the street, the Whitleys, brought me a plate of homemade cookies as a welcome gift. A single mother next door, Angela, introduced me to her 2 kids. They seemed like good, decent people. However, I noticed a kind of hush whenever I mentioned the Magnolia Crest HOA. A few neighbors rolled their eyes at the mention of Karen's name, muttering about her strict enforcement of trivial rules. Everything had to be just so: the height of your grass, the color palette of your garden, even the type of mailbox. I'd faced pettiness like that before in previous HOA communities, so I chalked it up to standard suburban micromanagement. One evening, I was on my porch reviewing case files for an upcoming pro bono matter when I noticed a commotion at the street corner. A small group of men and women, likely volunteers, were handing out flyers to passing drivers. The flyers had large bold text that read, "Support our local homeless shelter." Then came smaller text, "The Golden Haven Shelter is fundraising to expand capacity. Any donations help." I watched from a distance as volunteers approached a car that had pulled over. They chatted, smiling, passing the leaflet through the window. But before the next driver could roll down their window, a familiar figure, Karen, in her pastel blouse, marched up and seemed to scold them. I couldn't hear everything, but her gestures were emphatic. She pointed to the entrance of Magnolia Crest, as if ordering them to leave. One of the volunteers, a tall man, tried to reason with her, but Karen shook her head, arms crossed. The volunteers, looking deflated, eventually gathered their materials and walked off, leaving Karen victorious on the sidewalk, as though she'd chased away a threat. I frowned. Fundraising for a homeless shelter hardly seemed threatening. Yet, from her behavior, you'd think it was a criminal gang. A slight unease took root in my stomach, a suspicion that perhaps this was no ordinary HOA leader. But I had no clue how deeply her hostility ran toward those less fortunate, nor how drastically she intended to act on that hostility in the coming weeks. A few days later, I received an email blast titled Important HOA Update, Upcoming Meeting. The subject line read, Proposal to Restrict Unwanted Solicitation. The body explained that Magnolia Crest's board would be voting on new regulations preventing unsanctioned groups from handing out flyers or collecting donations at the neighborhood entrance. The message was signed, of course, by Karen, president. The language was somewhat vague, but I sensed it targeted the homeless shelter fundraiser volunteers. As a lawyer who routinely dealt with First Amendment and public interest matters, I recognized the potential overreach. The street entrance was arguably public land or, at worst, a thoroughfare. Strictly banning volunteers from distributing info about a charitable cause might conflict with free speech principles, though I knew HOAs often tried to blur lines when it came to shared property or easements. That evening, while organizing my thoughts for the next day's hearing, I found myself returning to that email. The mention of unwanted solicitation unsettled me, especially in the context of the volunteers I'd seen. They seemed genuine and altruistic, trying to help the Golden Haven shelter. Why was the HOA so bent on shutting them out? The next morning at the law firm, my mind strayed to the issue again. I decided to dig deeper into Golden Haven, learning it was a well-established homeless shelter located about a mile away from Magnolia Crest. They had been around for a decade, providing food, beds, and reintegration assistance for individuals struggling with homelessness, many of whom were families or veterans. The shelter was recognized locally for its success in helping people transition to stable housing. While I wasn't sure how else Karen's hostility toward them might manifest, a nagging worry told me this was just the start. Something in her tone, her body language, suggested a deeper vendetta. Sometimes, prejudice or fear made neighbors view nearby shelters as negative influences, blaming them for property value concerns. I suspected Karen was one such neighbor, using the HOA as a vehicle to push her own anti-homeless agenda. Little did I realize how viciously she would escalate the situation, and how it would force me to step onto the legal battlefield that I typically save for my clients, not my own neighborhood. The following weekend, the HOA convened in the Magnolia Crest Community Center, a pristine building with gleaming floors and large windows overlooking a manicured garden. Roughly 50 residents filled folding chairs set in neat rows. I joined them, hoping to observe the board's discussion on the unwanted solicitation proposal. Karen sat at a long table alongside two other board members, both of whom seemed far more hesitant. She welcomed everyone with a rehearsed smile, glancing at her agenda. "Thank you for attending," she said, her voice amplified by a portable mic. "We have a few items to discuss tonight, including landscaping budgets and our new resolution to keep our neighborhood safe from intrusive outside solicitations." Her eyes scanned the crowd, landing momentarily on me. I offered a neutral nod. Several neighbors whispered among themselves. The meeting began with mundane issues, scheduling for community cleanup day, adjusting HOA dues by a small percentage. Then Karen shifted to the hot topic. "We've had complaints about groups approaching our residents with flyers, specifically the Golden Haven shelter representatives. While we respect their cause, this behavior is disruptive and unwelcome. As such, the board proposes a ban on distributing any charitable materials at our entrance, unless explicitly approved by me. I mean, by the board." She coughed, correcting herself, then continued. "This will protect our community from being harassed or guilt-tripped. It also prevents traffic congestion." A few people raised their hands. Mr. Powell, a middle-aged father of two, spoke up. "I actually support Golden Haven. They're local, they do good work. Banning them from handing out flyers might be an overreaction." Karen forced a smile. "Thank you for your input, but we must protect property values. Many prospective buyers are turned off by visible signs of homelessness or anything that suggests our area might be overrun by panhandlers. Her language felt coded, brimming with prejudice. Another resident, Elena Ramirez, chimed in. They're not panhandlers. They're volunteers collecting donations. Isn't that allowed on a public road anyway? Karen's smile vanished. Magnolia Crest signage and landscaping near the entrance belongs to us. We have the right to enforce a no-solicitation rule. She turned to the board members next to her. We'll vote now. I stood, raising my hand. Apologies, Ms. Anson. Karen, but I'd like to offer a legal perspective. My name is Alden Marshall. In many jurisdictions, charitable solicitations, especially for a recognized 501c3 nonprofit, enjoy broad protection. If this area is not purely private property, if the sidewalk is public or designated as an easement, an outright ban may be unenforceable. At minimum, it could invite legal challenges. Karen's gaze hardened. Mr. Marshall, we appreciate your concern, but the HOA has consulted counsel. We're confident in our right to maintain tranquility. Now, if you don't mind. She cast me a look that practically shouted, be quiet. The board's official counsel, a man who seemed uncomfortable, cleared his throat but said nothing. The vote proceeded. 2 board members, presumably swayed by Karen's intimidation, voted yes for the new resolution. That was enough for a majority. Karen announced, motion passed. Effective immediately, no unauthorized solicitation at the neighborhood entrance, including Golden Haven or any other group. She ended the discussion with a dismissive rap of her gavel on the table. Many residents exchanged dismayed glances. I sank back into my seat, mind racing. This resolution, while draped in polite wording, was a direct assault on a local shelter. My instincts as a human rights attorney roiled. I was used to defending the marginalized. This was no different. A quiet resolve took root. If Karen tried to push it further, I'd be ready. News of the new HOA resolution spread swiftly through Magnolia Crest. A few neighbors complained openly on social media, calling the measure heartless. However, Karen's loyalists, some who echoed her concerns about property values, praised the board's decision. A rift formed in the community, with whispers of discontent overshadowing the once friendly suburban facade. One evening, I was relaxing in my living room, trying to unwind with a novel, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Is this Alden Marshall? Asked a woman, voice trembling slightly. You don't know me, but I'm a volunteer at Golden Haven. My name is Cheryl Rhodes. I perked up. Yes, this is Alden. How can I help? She explained that a mutual acquaintance had referred her to me, knowing I was an attorney in the neighborhood. I'm worried about Golden Haven, Cheryl confided. We've noticed suspicious behavior, calls from people claiming to be from the Magnolia Crest HOA, demanding we stop our services near the community or face legal trouble. But that's not all. We also heard rumors that certain local residents want the city to revoke our permit or shut us down entirely. It's gotten us all on edge. My heart sank. This was bigger than just flyers at the entrance. Have they threatened you with an actual lawsuit? She paused. Not yet, but they're leaning on us, calling city officials, complaining about everything from litter to safety. The city inspector even showed up to check if we were violating capacity rules. It felt orchestrated. I suspected Karen's hand in all this. Cheryl, if you're comfortable, I can help. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I know how to respond to nuisance claims or intimidation tactics. If you share documents, correspondences, anything that might indicate a campaign against the shelter, I'll review them. Cheryl's sigh of relief was audible. Thank you so much. This shelter serves vulnerable families. We can't afford a legal battle, but we also can't just shut down. After hanging up, I sat in the hush of my living room, anger stirring. Karen's blockade on flyers was merely a stepping stone. She was likely orchestrating a broader attempt to eradicate Golden Haven entirely, believing it threatened the prestige of Magnolia Crest. As a lawyer and a decent human being, I knew I had to intervene. I couldn't let bigotry disguised as property value protection force a vital community resource to close. The very next day, I made an appointment to visit Golden Haven Shelter. Situated a mile from Magnolia Crest, it occupied a modest brick building with a small playground in the back. Inside, volunteers bustled about, preparing hot meals, organizing clothing donations, and offering counseling to those in need. The atmosphere exuded warmth, even in the face of the difficulties the staff confronted daily. Cheryl Rhodes greeted me in the main lobby. She had kind eyes, though lines of worry creased her brow. Over coffee in a small office, she handed me a stack of letters, emails, and phone messages that the shelter had received in recent months. Some were from city zoning officials verifying complaints of excessive noise or loitering. Others came from unknown senders, accusing the shelter of bringing crime to the area. One message specifically referenced Magnolia Crest, claiming residents demand the removal of your facility. As I flipped through these documents, I spotted patterns. Each complaint was short on specifics, but high on alarmist language. It reeked of a coordinated smear campaign. One letter even threatened to organize a lawsuit unless Golden Haven ceases expansions. That was particularly concerning, as I knew the shelter was in the process of fundraising to expand its dormitory to house more families. Cheryl's voice trembled as she explained, "We're already at capacity, turning people away some nights. Our expansion would add 12 more beds. But if these complaints keep piling up, we fear the city might pull our permit, or at least freeze our building plans." I nodded sympathetically. This definitely sounds orchestrated. I strongly suspect the HOA president from my neighborhood is behind it. She's posted harsh statements about the shelter. "I'd like to represent you pro bono if it escalates legally." She blinked back tears. "That means so much to us. We're good people here, just trying to help." It's demoralizing. Before leaving, I toured the facility, meeting a few shelter residents, families who'd lost jobs or housing unexpectedly, veterans coping with PTSD. They were eager to rebuild their lives, grateful for the roof over their heads. It was heartbreaking to think Karen and her allies saw these folks as nothing but a threat. When I arrived back at Magnolia Crest late that afternoon, I found a surprise waiting on my doorstep, a sealed letter from the HOA. Inside was an official notice citing me for unauthorized front yard decor, claiming my modest potted flowers didn't match the community color scheme. The letter threatened fines if not corrected. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurd timing. Clearly, Karen had singled me out. Her petty brand of retaliation had begun. I resolved not to let it intimidate me. Over the ensuing weeks, tensions rose on multiple fronts. I formally offered my legal services to Golden Haven, drafting a letter to city officials that refuted the barrage of spurious complaints. We argued that the shelter complied with all regulations, had strong community support, and was essential for public welfare. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I reached out to local nonprofits, forging a coalition to defend the shelter's right to operate and expand. At Magnolia Crest, Karen's hostility intensified. She repeatedly left HOA violation notices on my door, nitpicking about the height of my lawn, the color of my mail slot, the spacing of my shrubs. I recognized these citations as baseless harassment, but some neighbors privately confided that she was pressuring them, too, especially those who had publicly criticized her stance on the shelter. One neighbor, Angela, told me, "Karen called me last week, demanding I remove a small sign from my window that said support Golden Haven. She threatened to fine me. I'm a single mom. I can't afford a legal fight with the HOA." This was the same pattern of intimidation that Golden Haven was facing. Karen used her position to bully people into conforming to her worldview. Already, there was a deepening split among residents, some siding with Karen to avoid trouble, others quietly supporting the shelter, but too scared to openly resist. Meanwhile, I kept meeting more families who benefited from the shelter or believed in its mission. A local pastor thanked me for getting involved. "We tried to reason with Karen," he said sadly, "but she won't hear it. She claims she's protecting the neighborhood from degeneracy." Her words, not mine. A private sense of outrage burned in my chest. I specialized in human rights law for precisely this reason, to stand up to the powerful who trampled on vulnerable individuals. Now that cruelty was happening in my own backyard, I suspected that sooner or later, Karen would overplay her hand, and I intended to be ready. Sure enough, Karen soon made a bold move. The HOA's online bulletin board suddenly featured a post by her, titled, "Proposal: Disallow Homeless Facilities Within 1 Mile of Magnolia Crest." The post read like a manifesto, claiming that residents deserve to live without fear of unpredictable, transient populations, and that Magnolia Crest must protect its property values by lobbying the city to rezone or relocate any homeless shelter within a 1-mile radius. The final lines were chilling. If the city refuses, we will consider private litigation against the shelter and its supporters for creating a public nuisance. Magnolia Crest will not be a dumping ground for the city's problems. The post garnered an immediate storm of comments, many outraged, some supportive. My phone buzzed with neighbors, volunteers, and even local reporters asking for clarification. I felt my jaw tighten. Karen had effectively declared war on the shelter. Legally, the HOA had no direct authority to force a homeless shelter to move, especially one that predates many of the houses. But the threat of private litigation could intimidate city officials or donors who might not want the headache of a drawn-out legal battle. And Karen, it seemed, was more than willing to push her vendetta no matter the humanitarian cost. To gather more information, I privately reached out to one of the 2 other board members, Gary North, who I knew disliked Karen's extremism. Over coffee at a local diner, Gary explained, she's been calling lawyers, looking into any possible angle, noise ordinances, zoning technicalities, land use suits. She's convinced she can bankrupt Golden Haven with endless litigation. He sipped his coffee, lowering his voice. I never signed up for this. I joined the board to handle landscaping budgets, not to wage some war on homeless people. But she's manipulative. Alden, she has a small clique that votes with her no matter what. I nodded grimly. Thanks for the heads up, Gary. If she pursues legal action, we won't stand idle. When I returned home that night, I fired off emails to an attorney friend specializing in zoning law, explaining the situation and seeking her perspective. If Karen's threat materialized, we needed a robust defense strategy, perhaps even a countersuit for harassment or violation of fair housing laws, depending on the angle. One way or another, I was preparing for a major legal showdown. As Karen rallied her supporters, I worked to assemble a counter-coalition. Together with local advocates, nonprofits, and a handful of outraged Magnolia Crest residents, we strategized ways to block the HOA's attempt to banish Golden Haven. Public pressure. We enlisted local journalists to highlight the shelter's success stories, putting a human face on the issue. We arranged interviews with families who'd been helped, shedding light on the real people behind the label homeless. Political engagement. We met with city council members, explaining how Magnolia Crest's demands were baseless and harmful. Councilors were wary of being seen as anti-homeless, so they were receptive. Legal preparedness. With my zoning law colleague, we prepared defenses and potential countersuits. If Karen filed a nuisance claim, we'd argue Golden Haven was a lawful, permitted facility serving a critical public interest. We also formed a local group, Friends of Golden Haven, which included attorneys, pastors, business owners, and philanthropic citizens. Our weekly meetings convened at a community hall, ironically, just outside Magnolia Crest's boundaries, so Karen couldn't block us. During these gatherings, we hashed out the next steps, letter-writing campaigns to the mayor, fundraising drives for the shelter's expansion, and volunteer events to improve the shelter's property so it remained in top condition. We understood that if the city saw Golden Haven as well-maintained and widely supported, it would be less likely to yield to Karen's demands. Meanwhile, inside Magnolia Crest, the divide sharpened. Some neighbors sided wholeheartedly with Karen, praising her boldness. Others were horrified, seeing her rhetoric as bigoted. The rest stayed neutral, probably hoping the conflict would blow over. But every time we made progress, Karen doubled down with more inflammatory statements, claiming rising crime, drug use, and other unsubstantiated concerns. Despite having zero evidence that Golden Haven's residents caused any rise in neighborhood problems, she hammered on fear. The stage was set for a major confrontation, and it arrived in the form of a high-stakes HOA meeting. Karen summoned a special session of the HOA, widely advertised as a chance to address the homeless shelter crisis. Word spread that she intended to push through a formal resolution urging the city to rezone or close Golden Haven, and to greenlight a lawsuit if the city refused. Sensing a pivotal moment, many neighbors braved the sweltering summer evening to gather in the community center. I arrived early, joining a cluster of supporters from Friends of Golden Haven. some wore pins or t-shirts displaying the shelter's logo. Karen's loyalists, by contrast, formed their own group near the front, exchanging nods of agreement. The tension crackled. When Karen strode in, it was with the air of a queen preparing to address her subjects. She wore a businesslike suit, hair sprayed into place, and carried a stack of papers that likely contained her proposed motion. The crowd hushed as she stood behind a podium. "Thank you for coming," she began, her smile tight. "I've received countless complaints about the negative impact of homeless facilities near our beautiful community. As president of the Magnolia Crest HOA, I cannot allow these concerns to go unheard. Tonight, we will vote on a resolution calling on city officials to relocate the Golden Haven shelter and, if they refuse, authorizing the HOA to commence legal action." A rumble of chatter swept the audience, some in support, others in protest. Karen raised her hand for silence. Before she could continue, I stood. "Ms. Anson, my name is Alden Marshall, an attorney here in Magnolia Crest. Many neighbors object to scapegoating a legitimate, life-saving service. Golden Haven is within its rights to operate. They hold valid permits, comply with safety standards, and serve the vulnerable. There is no basis for forcibly relocating them." Karen's jaw set. "With all due respect, Mr. Marshall, the board, not you, decides how best to preserve the quality of life in our neighborhood. Our property values are at stake." Another neighbor, Ms. Ramirez, jumped in. "This is immoral. Kicking out a homeless shelter just to keep housing prices up?" Karen shot her a scathing glare. "We must consider the greater good. Our data," she motioned to a binder, "shows a correlation between shelters and lower home values." An older gentleman in the back raised his voice. "What data? Show us. Or is this just fear-mongering?" Karen ignored the question. She smoothed her papers. "I will read the resolution. Then we'll take a vote. Any other comments will be limited, no more than 1 minute each." Murmurs of discontent rippled through the crowd. She launched into a speech thick with insinuations about loitering, undesirable individuals, and potential danger for local children. The resolution's language was borderline slanderous, accusing Golden Haven of fostering crime without any proof. She ended with a flourish. "Therefore, we, the HOA, demand the city relocate the shelter or we'll file suit for creating a public nuisance and harming property owners in Magnolia Crest." I raised my hand again, but Karen barked, "Voting members of the HOA only. Mr. Marshall, you may be recognized if time permits." She turned to her board cohorts. "Let's proceed with the vote." One board member was visibly uneasy, glancing at the crowd. The other, a known Karen ally, nodded vigorously. The room erupted into debate, residents shouting for or against the measure. Karen tried to gavel the meeting to order, but chaos overshadowed her commands. Sensing the meltdown, I stepped forward, projecting my voice above the clamor. "Folks, let's be rational. A frivolous lawsuit could cost the HOA tens of thousands, maybe more, and we'd likely lose. Meanwhile, we'd cause immense harm to vulnerable people who rely on Golden Haven." Karen slammed her gavel. "Sit down. You have no official platform here." At that moment, something remarkable happened. A wave of neighbors rose from their chairs, chanting, "We oppose the ban," or "Don't close the shelter." The outcry was so loud, the board members exchanged anxious looks. Still, Karen pushed for the vote. Gary North, the second board member, stood and faced the audience. "I'm sorry, Ms. Anson, but I cannot support this resolution. It's unethical and may be illegal." Karen's face turned red with fury. She hissed, "You coward." Then, in a rushed motion, she signaled her ally to vote. She raised her own hand in favor. Her ally did the same, but Gary refused. The motion was locked at a tie, 2-2. The deciding vote was the board's secretary, an elderly woman who had been silent throughout. She looked torn, glancing nervously at Karen. After a long hesitation, she announced, "I abstain. I can't condone this." With that, the resolution failed. Cheers erupted from the crowd. Karen's eyes burned with anger. She hammered the gavel again and declared the meeting over, stomping out amid a mixture of applause and jeers. Though we'd blocked her formal HOA resolution that night, I sensed from her demeanor that she wasn't done fighting. She'd simply find another path, and likely a more clandestine one. Sure enough, Karen refused to accept defeat. Within days, I caught wind of a civil lawsuit filed in the county courthouse. Magnolia Crest HOA versus Golden Haven. The complaint read like a laundry list of fabricated allegations, spreading trash, harboring drug users, endangering local children, and driving down property values. The suit demanded the shelter be declared a public nuisance and closed or relocated. Though the HOA board had not officially approved the lawsuit, Karen was forging ahead, presumably claiming to act on the HOA's behalf. Neighbors were furious when they learned of it. Some had no idea their dues might be used to fund legal action. Gary North emailed me, confirming Karen had leveraged a questionable bylaw that gave the HOA president broad discretion to initiate legal proceedings if she deemed something a direct threat to community welfare. Now, Golden Haven was forced to mount a defense. The shelter's staff panicked, worried they might not have the resources for a drawn-out court battle. I reassured them, "We have strong grounds to show the lawsuit is baseless. I'll represent you pro bono with my firm's backing." Behind the scenes, we gathered data to demolish the HOA's claims. We collected police reports showing no spike in crime attributed to the shelter. We compiled testimony from local families praising Golden Haven's role in reducing homelessness. Meanwhile, we prepared to argue that the lawsuit was malicious and violated anti-SLAPP statutes, laws designed to prevent frivolous suits aimed at silencing public interest entities. A hearing was scheduled within the month. Tensions soared. Karen gloated in HOA newsletters about finally taking real action, while others privately questioned her mental stability. The day we received notice of the first court date, my phone rang off the hook. Reporters, city officials, anxious residents all wanted updates. This case was shaping up to be a high-profile clash, one that might set a precedent about how far HOAs could go in targeting homeless facilities. For my part, I was determined to defend Golden Haven with every legal tool at my disposal. I'd never expected to wage such a war on my own home turf, but the cause was righteous. Stand up for the vulnerable and expose Karen's cruelty. I had no doubt it would get messy, especially when Karen realized she was facing a seasoned human rights attorney who wouldn't back down. As the hearing approached, both sides embarked on discovery, exchanging documents, witness lists, and other evidence. My firm spent countless hours poring over every complaint or statement Karen had made about Golden Haven. We discovered some key points. No evidence of increased crime. The local police department provided official incident logs for the area around Golden Haven. Contrary to the lawsuit's allegations, crime rates in that vicinity had actually declined in recent years. False drug den claims. The complaint alleged that drug deals took place on shelter grounds. We found no credible reports, nor did the city's health department. The shelter had a robust screening process and partnered with rehab centers to help those with substance abuse. Property values. A real estate market analysis showed Magnolia Crest's home values had steadily risen, unaffected by Golden Haven's presence. Indeed, the shelter had existed before the neighborhood was even fully built. Meanwhile, we discovered that Karen had orchestrated a letter-writing campaign to city inspectors, claiming building code violations at Golden Haven. Each letter was nearly identical in phrasing, suggesting a coordinated effort. Inspectors found no serious violations. This pattern bolstered our argument that the lawsuit was not a genuine grievance, but a vendetta driven by bias against homeless individuals. Karen, for her part, hired a local law firm known for hyper-aggressive tactics. They tried burying us in motions, seeking to expand discovery into irrelevancies, like the shelter's internal finances, staff training details, etc. We countered with protective orders, ensuring the court saw Karen's fishing expedition for what it was. Through it all, the public spotlight grew. Local media recounted the sensational story of a suburban HOA attempting to uproot a longtime homeless shelter, and the pro bono lawyer from that same HOA community leading the defense. Karen gave a few interviews, spouting claims about protecting property owners from blight. But the more she spoke, the more she revealed her prejudices and shaky justifications. At times, stress weighed on me. My day job already demanded high energy, and now I was fully engaged in a lawsuit that kept me working late nights. Yet I also drew strength from the knowledge that people's lives and dignity were at stake. If we lost, families would be cast back onto the streets. That was motivation enough to press on. The day of the initial hearing dawned clear and bright. Outside the Ravenwood County Courthouse, a crowd gathered: reporters, local activists, Magnolia Crest residents. Some carried signs that read, "Support Golden Haven," or "Stop the War on the Homeless." Others, presumably on Karen's side, held placards stating, "Keep our neighborhood safe." The tension was electric. Inside the courtroom, a tall mahogany bench presided over by Judge Beatrice Moreland. She was known for her no-nonsense demeanor and thorough approach. I sat at one table with Cheryl Rhodes and other Golden Haven staff, flanked by two of my law partners from Henley and Dorset. On the opposite side, Karen and her attorneys occupied a second table. Karen wore a crisp suit, her expression haughty and unyielding. A smattering of Magnolia Crest residents sat behind her, forming a silent block of supporters. The hearing began with procedural matters. We introduced ourselves, spelled out the nature of the complaint. Karen's lead counsel, a man named Frederick Cormack, launched into a dramatic portrayal of Golden Haven as a menace. He brandished a stack of papers, claiming they proved rampant loitering and property damage. He insisted residents lived in constant fear. When it was my turn, I politely dismantled these accusations. I pointed to official police data, showing no correlation between the shelter and criminal activity. I submitted photos attesting to the shelter's cleanliness. I introduced testimony from real estate experts confirming stable property values. Judge Moreland leaned forward, studying the exhibits. She pressed Cormack on specifics. "Sir, do you have any police reports of break-ins or violence traced to Golden Haven?" Cormack squirmed, eventually admitting, "Well, not exactly. But residents feel threatened by the presence of these individuals, who are often jobless or potentially mentally ill." The judge's expression hardened. "Feelings are not evidence, counselor. We need objective proof of actual nuisance. So far, I see none." Karen bristled, whispering urgently in Cormack's ear. He nodded. "Your Honor, we plan to show how the homeless population negatively influences property values. Our experts will testify to prospective buyers being deterred." I interjected. "We have an appraisal specialist who'll confirm no such deterrent effect. Furthermore, the shelter is operating under a valid city permit. This lawsuit aims to forcibly relocate a lawful, charitable institution without any legitimate basis, a clear abuse of legal process." The judge raised a brow. "Indeed, I must ask, why is the plaintiff seeking closure or relocation of the entire facility, as opposed to addressing specific behaviors or alleged code violations?" Cormack sputtered. "Because we believe the facility itself is the root cause of these problems." The judge sighed, peering down at the bench. "I'll allow each side to present evidence at a full trial. But let me be clear, nuisance suits require substantial proof, not speculation. If I find the plaintiff's claims spurious, I won't hesitate to dismiss the case and consider awarding legal fees to the defendant." A hush fell. Karen's face drained of color as she absorbed the judge's warning about covering Golden Haven's legal fees if they lost. Meanwhile, I felt a surge of cautious optimism. The judge's stance suggested she saw through the flimsy allegations. This was just the preliminary hearing, though. A final trial date was set for 6 weeks ahead. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. I gave a brief statement to the press, emphasizing that Golden Haven was a lawful, valuable community service. Karen tried to push forward to the microphones, but outraged protesters booed her. She scurried off, flanked by her allies. Despite her humiliating showing in court, I had no doubt she'd continue fighting, possibly employing more desperate tactics. The next few weeks were a tense waiting game. Each side prepared for the upcoming trial, gathering witnesses and finalizing arguments. Karen's attorneys sought to bolster their case with expert testimony from a local real estate agent who vaguely claimed homeless shelters lowered home prices. Meanwhile, we lined up city officials, a police captain, and local business owners who would attest to Golden Haven's positive impact. But away from the courtroom, Karen resorted to new intimidation tactics. Angela, the single mother who lived next to me, found a threatening note taped to her door after she voiced support for the shelter at a local forum. The note read, "Keep quiet or the HOA will make your life miserable." She was understandably shaken. One afternoon, I noticed a woman loitering near my driveway, surreptitiously snapping photos of my house, my license plate. When I stepped outside to confront her, She jumped into a car and sped away. Later that day, I received an official letter from the HOA demanding I remove a prohibited structure from my backyard, referencing a small greenhouse I'd built to grow herbs. I had filed the correct paperwork, so the complaint was absurd. I suspected Karen was harassing me, hoping to rattle my focus before trial. Amid these tensions, a surprise ally emerged. Mr. Arthur Crane, a wealthy property investor who owned several commercial buildings in Ravenwood. He reached out, requesting a meeting about Golden Haven. Over coffee in a sleek downtown cafe, he revealed that he'd grown up in foster care and spent time on the streets as a teen. He'd eventually built a successful business, but never forgot his roots. "I saw the coverage," he said quietly, sipping espresso. "I want to help fund Golden Haven's legal defense. The suit is unjust. No one else should face what I did, being looked down on just for being homeless." His donation was generous, ensuring that Golden Haven could withstand a prolonged legal battle if needed. Furthermore, his public endorsement lent credibility. He was known as a savvy entrepreneur, not a bleeding-heart idealist. With Mr. Crane's backing, we fortified the shelter's resources, strengthening our position. When I broke the news of this benefactor to Cheryl and her team, they were overjoyed. Finally, they could focus on running the shelter without dreading bankruptcy from attorney fees. Meanwhile, Karen likely seethed at the news that we were better funded than ever. She'd banked on draining Golden Haven's resources, but that plan was foiled. At last, the trial date arrived. The Ravenwood County Courthouse was abuzz with reporters, onlookers, and advocates from both sides. A sense of theater hung in the air, heightened by the knowledge that the outcome could set a precedent for how communities treat shelters. Inside the polished courtroom, Judge Moreland presided over a bench trial. The plaintiff's side was led by Frederick Cormack, with Karen sitting behind him, posture rigid and determined. On our side, I took the lead counsel role, supported by my law partners and a line of expert witnesses. Golden Haven staff, supporters, and even some Magnolia Crest residents filled the gallery, straining to hear every word. Cormack began with his opening statement, painting Golden Haven as a magnet for crime and disorder. He pointed to concerned residents who felt unsafe. He paraded a few who testified about seeing suspicious characters on the street, though none provided concrete examples tying them to the shelter. We cross-examined each witness, unearthing that their fears were largely based on rumors. One man admitted he'd never actually observed criminal behavior. He just heard talk. Another said her realtor told her a nearby shelter might lower her home's resale value, but no hard data was provided. Next, the plaintiff's so-called expert real estate agent offered broad claims that shelters inevitably reduced home prices. We countered with official market analyses showing Magnolia Crest home values had risen steadily. Pressed for specifics, the agent grew flustered, eventually conceding the area's prices had not declined. It was a devastating blow to the plaintiff's argument. Then came our turn. I called Captain Rhodes from the local police station to the stand. He testified that Golden Haven residents rarely came up in police calls. In fact, he noted, the shelter staff often coordinate with us to help individuals in crisis. We see no evidence that they contribute to neighborhood crime. We introduced letters from city officials praising Golden Haven for reducing homelessness in the region. We displayed photos of the facility's well-kept grounds, refuting claims of squalor. We read statements from families who'd escaped domestic violence or sudden job loss, crediting the shelter for saving them from desperation. Finally, we hammered home the legal argument. The suit was a strategic lawsuit against public participation, meant to silence or eliminate Golden Haven's presence. It had no factual basis, and we moved for immediate dismissal with prejudice. Throughout, Karen grew increasingly agitated, whispering frantically to Cormack. At times, her face reddened as she realized the plaintiff's case was collapsing under the weight of actual evidence. By the time we concluded, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. After closing arguments, Judge Moreland adjourned for deliberation. Everyone milled about the hallway, nerves on edge. The entire proceeding had lasted several days, given the volume of witnesses. Finally, we were summoned back into the courtroom for her ruling. We rose to our feet as the judge entered, her expression unreadable. In a clear, measured voice, she delivered her decision. Having reviewed the evidence, I find that the plaintiffs, The Magnolia Crest HOA failed to present credible proof of actual nuisance or harm caused by Golden Haven. The allegations rely on speculation, hearsay, and prejudice rather than verifiable facts. Meanwhile, the defense presented substantial evidence that Golden Haven operates lawfully, maintains a safe environment, and provides essential services to the community. Therefore, I rule in favor of the defendants. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. In addition, based on the malicious nature of the claims, I am awarding attorneys' fees and costs to the defendant. Magnolia Crest HOA, as the named plaintiff, is held responsible for these fees. If the HOA leadership or president acted without proper board authority, that is an internal matter for the HOA to address, but the financial liability stands. An audible gasp rippled through the courtroom. The blow was monumental. Not only had the suit failed, but the HOA now faced paying a hefty sum for Golden Haven's legal expenses, plus potential damages. Karen's eyes widened in horror. She shot to her feet, sputtering, "Your Honor, there must be an appeal. We can't." Judge Moreland banged her gavel. "Counselor, your client is free to appeal. But let me warn you, an appellate court may find this even less persuasive." Karen's shoulders slumped. At that moment, the magnitude of her defeat sunk in. She'd not only lost the legal battle, but had exposed Magnolia Crest to massive financial repercussions. I felt an enormous sense of relief and triumph, though tempered by the knowledge that Karen might try something reckless in retaliation. Outside the courthouse, supporters of Golden Haven erupted into celebration. Some volunteers hugged each other, others wept tears of relief. I gave a brief press statement, reiterating that justice had prevailed and that philanthropic organizations like Golden Haven should not be bullied by baseless lawsuits. Karen, meanwhile, fled the scene. Cameras followed her, capturing her furious expression as she refused to comment. The war seemed over, but the final fallout had yet to unfold. Back in Magnolia Crest, the mood shifted dramatically. Residents were stunned to learn the HOA was on the hook for the defendants' legal fees, a sum rumored to exceed $100,000. Many demanded a special meeting to oust Karen from her presidency and ascertain how she had initiated the lawsuit without official board approval. Some worried their annual dues could skyrocket to cover the cost. Under extreme pressure, the HOA called an emergency assembly in the community center. The place overflowed with outraged homeowners. Karen sat at the board table, flanked by the same two members from the earlier fiasco. But this time, she looked rattled, her veneer of calm authority cracked. The meeting opened with accusations. Residents blasted Karen for using their dues to fund a hateful, doomed legal fight. One after another, they demanded her resignation. The other board members confirmed they had not endorsed the lawsuit. Karen had used a rarely invoked bylaw to do so unilaterally, but that same bylaw required the board to ratify her action within a certain time frame. They had not. Therefore, her actions were extra-legal, leaving the HOA fully liable. Karen tried to defend herself. "I acted in good faith to protect our property values. If we'd stuck together, we could have won." She glared at me from across the room. This man, Marshall, twisted the facts. "I was only doing what's best for our community." Her words fell flat. Anger roiled in the crowd. A motion for immediate recall soared through. Gary North seconded it, and the majority raised their hands. Karen was effectively stripped of her position on the spot. She shrieked about a witch hunt, but the crowd's jeers drowned her out. Once the recall passed, the new board promised transparency. They arranged a legal audit to determine if Karen had misused funds or committed fraud in orchestrating the lawsuit. It was clear her reign had ended. Yet the question remained. How much further might she fall once the legal system examined her conduct in detail? In the weeks following her recall, disturbing revelations emerged about Karen's methods. The new board's audit unearthed suspicious expenditures from the HOA bank account, large payments to a private investigator, presumably the person who spied on me and other neighbors, unexplained reimbursements for consulting fees, and invoice padding that suggested Karen might have skimmed money under false pretenses. The board forwarded their findings to local authorities. Detectives launched an investigation. Soon, it came to light that Karen had spent thousands in HOA funds without proper documentation. She'd also falsified meeting minutes to create the illusion of board support for the lawsuit. This went beyond petty rule enforcement. It was fraud. News outlets feasted on the scandal. Headlines like HOA president accused of embezzlement in homeless shelter battle spread across the local press. Karen tried to deny everything, labeling it a smear campaign. But the paper trail was damning. Within a month, the district attorney's office charged her with embezzlement, forgery, and misuse of funds, all felonies. Despite her lawyer's attempts to negotiate, the evidence was overwhelming. Meanwhile, the HOA faced a precarious financial future, forced to raise dues to cover Golden Haven's legal fees. Many residents, outraged, demanded restitution from Karen personally. A civil suit was filed against her, separate from the criminal charges, seeking to recoup the funds she had misallocated. On top of this, the fiasco had real personal consequences for Karen. Friends distanced themselves, neighbors shunned her. Some half expected she'd flee town to avoid prosecution. Instead, the police served her with an arrest warrant one morning, leading her out of her own house in handcuffs. Onlookers peeked through their curtains as the once powerful HOA president was placed into a patrol car, her eyes filled with shock and humiliation. Karen's criminal trial was relatively swift, given the mountain of evidence. She entered a no-contest plea to reduce the number of charges. Nevertheless, the judge handed down a harsh sentence. Prison time. Karen would serve 2 years in state prison for financial crimes and forgery. Restitution. She was ordered to repay the HOA for the misspent funds and cover a large portion of Golden Haven's legal fees. Property confiscation. Because her personal finances were insufficient to meet the court-ordered restitution, the judge authorized a lien on her house. Ultimately, the property would be seized and sold, with the proceeds used to pay back what she owed. On the day of sentencing, Karen appeared pale and shaken, the hubris drained from her once confident demeanor. She tried to plead for mercy, insisting her motives were to keep the neighborhood safe, but the court viewed her actions as malicious and illegal. The final gavel strike sealed her fate, jail time and the loss of her home. For many in Magnolia Crest, it was a sobering conclusion. The neighborhood was left to rebuild trust after such a divisive reign. Some felt pity, others relief. Most recognized the ultimate lesson, that an HOA president's power was limited by both law and common decency. In the months that followed, Magnolia Crest began to heal. The new board enacted reforms ensuring no single individual could single-handedly initiate lawsuits again. They increased transparency in financial matters, published clear minutes of every meeting, and sought community input for major decisions. Residents who had once feared speaking up now engaged openly in neighborhood discussions. The stigma around the Golden Haven shelter gradually dissolved. Some neighbors even started volunteering there, seeing firsthand how the facility provided hope and stability to people in crisis. As for Golden Haven, it finally completed the expansion that had triggered much of Karen's hostility. The new dormitory wing opened to house additional families, offering a fresh start to those teetering on the brink of homelessness. Public sympathy from the trial spurred donations, helping the shelter strengthen its programming and services. A silver lining to all the turmoil was the surge in awareness and support. On a personal note, I continued my legal practice at Henley and Dorset, focusing on civil rights and public interest cases. My time at Magnolia Crest had shown me that injustice can thrive in the most ordinary settings, and that one individual's hate-fueled agenda can wreak havoc unless challenged. But it also reminded me that communities can unite against such injustice. With Karen gone, the tension in Magnolia Crest faded. Late that summer, the HOA organized a community barbecue, inviting families from both the neighborhood and volunteers from Golden Haven. Tables laden with potluck dishes lined the local park. Children splashed in sprinklers. Laughter filled the air under the shade of magnolia trees. An air of genuine neighborliness replaced the old fear and anger. Strolling through the crowd, greeting new friends, I felt a profound sense of closure. The path had been rocky, but we had emerged more united. And so the final chapter of Karen's reign ended, not just with her punishment, but with a renewed sense of empathy and justice in a neighborhood that once teetered under her rule.